Okay, it's noon and we're here on our third installment of the Lunch and Learn series that I'm really excited about. I'm glad that the coalition has moved forward on this and I'm appreciative of the board's direction. My name is Kyle Butterfield. I'm the president of the Wyoming Airports Coalition. And today we're going to have an opportunity to hear from several people that are experts in the field when it comes to PFAS and firefighting foam transitions. Before we get into the actual substance of the webinar, I'd like to provide a few points of information and reminders as it relates to coalition business. First and foremost, thank you so much for being a member of the coalition. Thank you for participating and being part of something that I think is very valuable in the state of Wyoming. As you continue your participation with the coalition, we want to make sure that you're aware of our upcoming fall conference. We're very excited about this conference. The theme is fundamentals, and our conference host this year will be Saratoga. If you have not yet secured a room for the conference, we encourage you to do so. There are still some available. And if you go back and track some of the emails that we've sent out, what we're finding is we do have a block of rooms set with these hotels, but it does not mean necessarily that you can book those online. So if you need a room, feel free to just call directly to the hotels that have reserved a block of room. Let them know that you're part of the Airports Coalition and you'll get squared away. Also, don't forget to register for the conference. And those links are available on our webpage as far as registration goes, and then in the email communication that we've sent out. Again, we're very excited to be in Saratoga. It's a beautiful area of the state. They're going to be great hosts. There'll be an opportunity to golf at the Old Baldy course, which is a private club. And then also people can enjoy fishing on the river that runs through town, hiking, and other adventures. That's in addition to, of course, the wonderful lineup of sessions and speakers that we have squared away. And we've really tried to keep to the theme of fundamentals. Our goal is to provide you as members of the coalition tools to improve your community, your airport, your corporate business, and anything that's aviation related that can strengthen the state of Wyoming. We try and support that. So look for the emails. The conference is in September. That's September 18th through the 20th. And we'd love to have your participation. We definitely appreciate the support we've received so far, particularly from our corporate sponsors. A lot of what we do would not be possible without their assistance and their help. So without further ado, let's turn the time over to Jordan McDougall, who is a board member with the Airports Coalition, but also a member of the Jackson Hole Airport staff. She and members of her team, and we have other consultants ready to go to talk about this important topic of PFAS and provide some education. So with that, Jordan, I'll welcome you forward and we'll allow you to kind of take over and give us the meat of the presentation today. And while she's doing that, we have had a little bit of a challenge with Zoom today. You'll notice that we've got several Jordan McDougals on the screen. I suppose if that's not you and you're stealing her identity, feel very privileged that you get to be Jordan McDougall for an hour. What we're finding is the direct link is somehow causing you to join under a name that might not be your own. The best way to remedy that is to simply join via the meeting code instead of the actual hyperlink. I just sent an email to the group right before we started that has a reminder of what the meeting ID and the passcode is. So if you're finding that you can't join under your current name and you do get to steal Jordan's identity for an hour, which is fine, I hope, but you'd like to enter with your own ID, that's the way to do it. And we apologize for the technical inconvenience. With that, Jordan, thank you so much, and I'll cede the screen to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, everybody. Learning something new on Zoom every day. So you got to love when that happens. I really want to let everybody know how excited I am to have our third Lunch and Learn session. So And we have an amazing group of people that will be speaking today. I will not be speaking on this subject because I am not the subject matter expert, but we do have Kyle McDonald with TriHydro. Kyle is an environmental scientist with TriHydro Corporation. He has over a decade of experience managing environmental investigations and cleanup projects across the United States. He's an expert in handling a wide range of contaminants, including our PFAS. Beyond cleanup itself, Kyle is skilled in ensuring the accuracy of environmental data and selecting the most effective remediation methods. So we're really excited to have Kyle with us today. Following Kyle, we will have Dustin Hovel with the Jackson Hole Airport. He's the Assistant Airport Director out here in Jackson. He came to Jackson in 2016 and he came from the Aspen Pitkin County Airport. Dustin has more degrees and designations than I can even go through and list all of them. He is incredibly intelligent, and what he'll be speaking on today is our transition here in Jackson. So a little bit on that, mostly about Jackson and why we decided to do it. Following Dustin, we have two more subject matter experts. They are the co-owners of No Foam Systems. And we have Carholm and Linda Ramos, and they will be speaking about the No Foam system. Car is the innovator behind the No Foam Portable Model P, Commercial Trailer Model C, and Hangar systems. He spearheaded the NFPA 460, which is formerly 412 standard revisions. And he worked directly with the FAA Technical Center to ensure the acceptance of the no foam system or proportioner testing system. CAR leads all the technical side of things with the testing and training and is the primary point of contact for like the firefighting teams. The other side that we have is Lena. Lena is a social impact entrepreneur with over 17 years, successfully building compliance-driven companies like Clean Tech and Reg Tech to minimize negative impacts on the environment and protect people. She is the co-owner. She oversees all the business aspects of the No Foam systems and operates as the primary contact for airport operations and teams responsible for transitioning to no foam. And finally, we'll have Alton George. He is also here from Jackson. He is the Director of Operations here in Jackson. And he came to Jackson in 2013. He had a few years, 5 years of experience at FBO side of things. He also has a number of degrees and certifications. He is one of our ARF members here and is the Wyoming ARF representative. He's also a volunteer fire lieutenant with the local fire department and the president of the Jackson Hole or the Jackson Fire Association. So we will get kicked off with Kyle McDonald first, and let me share our screen. I pressed the wrong button. My apologies here. There we go. All right. Sorry about that. There we go.
And do you have the slide deck, Jordan?
Oh, did it not go up? Well, let's hang on here. Sorry about that. Try this once more. How is that?
It looks like we're seeing the virtual Lunch and Learn series flyer.
Oh, yep. So that is page 1. So here we go.
Okay.
There
There we go. All right, great. So yeah, thanks everyone for allowing me here to talk to you today. My name is Kyle McDonald. I'm an environmental scientist with TriHydro Corporation. TriHydro is an environmental engineering firm. We're founded and headquartered in Laramie, and we have offices and resources throughout the state and region, as you can see on that map. And I'm going to talk to you today about PFAS. And this topic, we're going to be fairly high level here, covering PFAS sort of 101, why we care about them, what they are, some of their unique challenges that they present. And it's a topic, it's a contaminant that I've been following and have consumed an increasing amount of my workload over the past 6 or 7 years. But if you're interested, or you or your staff are interested in a more in-depth presentation or training or site-specific discussion, my contact information is on the slide here, so please feel free to reach out. Jordan, next slide. But we'll dive right in. So what are PFAS? It's an acronym. It stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and this is an overarching blanket term that's used to describe a whole classification of man-made synthetic chemicals. And it's a very large and diverse chemical family. There are over 10,000 individual PFAS compounds associated with it, some estimates as high as 20,000. And this is an important note because when we are talking about PFAS, we're really only talking about a small handful of these compounds, just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. Any of one of these federal or state level regulations that are you might have heard about are talking about 2 to 9 individual PFAS compounds. Any given laboratory analytical report might report concentrations of up to 40 individual PFAS compounds, but there are thousands and thousands out there, and they often occur in very complex mixtures where any given environmental release may be associated with hundreds, maybe thousands of individual PFAS compounds. And so, this creates a very complex scenario in terms of managing environmental release, with a lot of uncertainty with the sort of dark matter, right? The body of the iceberg beneath the surface of the water, to complete that metaphor. They're very widely used in both industrial and consumer settings. They're considered to be ubiquitous, and this is one of the primary challenges when it comes to PFAS, is simply how widespread they are, both in terms of their distribution in the environment and also in terms of their distribution in our everyday lives. They're an emerging contaminant. This really just means that they are not yet fully understood. They're not yet widely regulated or widely monitored for, but this is changing, and it's changing very fast. And they're stable molecules. You probably heard of the moniker forever chemicals. And that's a little bit of a misnomer for reasons that we don't have time to dive into for the purposes of this presentation, but it still does convey the fact that they are very stable molecules. And this presents a number of challenges in terms of toxicology, fate and transport, and ultimately treatment and remediation of PFAS contamination in the environment. This Venn diagram is an illustration that we've used many times to show how PFAS hit on these 3 different challenges that we face in the environmental engineering industry that really set PFAS apart from other contaminants that we are perhaps more accustomed to dealing with. Next slide, Jordan. So we're going to go through a really quick timeline on PFAS, and the purpose here is really just to illustrate why it is you're hearing so much about PFAS right now. And so this is the PFAS emergence timeline. Again, all man-made synthetic chemicals originally developed and synthesized in the 1930s and 40s, really put to widespread use in manufacturing in the 50s and 60s. So we're talking about 70 plus years of widespread manufacturing and use. But it wasn't until the year 2000 that we started looking at PFAS as a chemical to potentially regulate. And that all started with the voluntary phase out of PFOS from US manufacturers. Next slide, please. And what followed was these 2 decades of slow and steady trickling of federal regulations addressing PFAS. And we're not going to go through every point on this slide, but we're calling this phase 1 of federal regulatory actions, affecting PFAS. Fast forward to October 2021. Next slide, please. And EPA releases their PFAS strategic roadmap. And again, we're not going to go through every bullet on this slide, but this graphic is derived directly from that strategic roadmap. And every bullet here represents a different regulatory mechanism that EPA is calling on to address the PFAS issue. And so we went from this slow and steady linear trajectory of regulations to this multi-pronged action on all fronts approach. EPA is really trying to address the PFAS issue in a comprehensive manner, and they're calling on essentially every tool that they have in their tool belt to do so. And at this point, we're in the 4th and final year of the initial strategic roadmap, and it really has been the busiest and most consequential year yet. And that's highlighted by several pieces of key legislation that are proposed or final. Next slide, please, Jordan. And to highlight a couple of those, we have them on the slide here, but EPA has identified PFAS as their #2 priority in terms of enforcement and compliance. This really underscores their hyper focus on this issue. EPA has finalized maximum contaminant levels for 6 PFAS compounds. MCLs are enforceable drinking water levels. These health-based standards are in the low parts per trillion level, 4 parts per trillion and 10 parts per trillion. And they have wide-reaching implications beyond just drinking water. For instance, we know that many states adopt MCLs as their default cleanup levels for groundwater, such as Wyoming. EPA has also proposed hazardous constituent designations for 9 PFAS compounds under RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and has final designations as hazardous substances for 2 PFAS compounds under CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. And so these all have very wide-reaching implications across a variety of sectors. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about PFAS chemistry, and to help me do that, I've thrown up an example PFAS compound on the slide here. This is PFOA. It's perhaps one of the more notorious PFAS compounds. And this is really just to illustrate sort of the typical chemical structure of PFAS, and that is this carbon-fluorine alkyl chain tail of the compound attached to a non-fluorinated functional group head. And this chemical structure imparts a number of attributes that make PFAS both widely used in our modern lives and also presents some challenges when it comes to managing their environmental release. So that carbon-fluorine bond is the strongest bond in organic chemistry. It makes these chemicals extremely resilient. And this imparts attributes such as chemical resistance, temperature resistance, long-lasting. That alkyl chain tail is both oleophobic and hydrophobic. It repels both oil and water. It makes them essentially slippery compounds. They don't want to stick to anything. So think of attributes such as friction reduction, non-stick, oil repellency, water repellency, etc. The non-fluorinated functional group head imparts polarity to these compounds, and it makes them soluble and highly mobile in water, presenting a number of challenges. The cartoon on the screen here is showing how PFAS might partition across the oil, water, and water-air interfaces. And this is an example of why PFAS are so effective in their use as AFFF, aqueous film forming foams, right? These Class B flammable liquid firefighting foams, which are a primary source of PFAS into the environment. They've been used for decades on many industrial sites, such as airports and military installations, oil and gas terminals, et cetera. And they're so effective in this use because they essentially blanket out the flammable liquid, suffocating the fire. Next slide, please. So those attributes lead to PFAS being used in a wide range of industrial categories and domestic products. And those listed on the slide here are some of the better known ones. But importantly, this list is not comprehensive, and we know that PFAS are used in many other products, many other industrial sectors. And it's kind of at the stage of where we know what we don't know here, right? And there's a lot of effort, including pieces of federal legislation being pushed to understand how widespread PFAS use are in our modern world. Next slide. So the ubiquity, coupled with those very low levels of interest, parts per trillion, low parts per trillion levels, give rise to a very heightened risk of cross-contamination and false positives in data when you're sampling for PFAS, sampling and analyzing for PFAS. And you couple that with the fact that your results are likely to be scrutinized because this is very much the hot topic of the moment. It creates a very uniquely challenging situation in terms of sampling and analyzing for PFAS compounds. So it is very important that if you have personnel sampling for PFAS, whether that's voluntary activities or activities that are compelled by some sort of regulation, that your field personnel are knowledgeable and well-trained in PFAS-specific sampling protocols. There are a number of pitfalls here that can result in your data being faulty and ultimately unusable, or answering questions that you might not be asking. This table here is showing the available target analytical methods that are out there for PFAS. And up until earlier this year, when sampling for PFAS in environmental samples such as groundwater or soil, it was really kind of the Wild West in terms of laboratory methods for analyzing PFAS. There was no promulgated method, and so laboratories were defining their own SOPs for analysis of these matrices. But in January of this year, EPA finalized their method 1633, and this is specific to PFAS in aqueous, solid, and tissue samples. It reports 40 individual PFAS compounds, and it's really going to be the go-to gold standard analytical method in terms of any sort of environmental characterization of PFAS, compliance, sampling, et cetera. Another important note here is that also in January of this year, EPA released their OTM method 50, and this is a draft method for analysis of PFAS in air emissions from stationary sources. So it's in the early stages yet, but it is a significant step towards the development of standards and regulations for air emissions of PFAS, as this is going to facilitate data collection and method refinement that's necessary to develop those standards. Next slide, please. So why do we care about PFAS? Well, there's a number of well-documented epidemiological effects: increased cholesterol, hormone disruption, a number of pregnancy-related disorders, and the list really goes on. And there are cancer designations as well, specifically for PFOA and PFOS. But the big picture here is that the data are somewhat limited, and this is particularly true when you contextualize this against that very large and diverse chemical family. We only really have duplicated peer-reviewed studies for a very small number of these PFAS compounds. By far and away, PFOA and PFOS are the most well-studied and well-documented, and there are a handful of other compounds that have well-documented studies out there. But ultimately, the data out there is sufficient enough to convince EPA that they needed to start moving forward on these environmental and health-based regulations, and they have been. Next slide, please. So how big is the PFAS problem? Well, this map is taken from a 2023 USGS study, and USGS estimates that 45% of the country's tap water has PFAS in it. American Water Works Association estimates it's going to cost $3.8 billion per year to treat public water systems for PFOA and PFOS. So that's drinking water. How about environmental contamination? Next slide, please. This map is taken from Northeastern's PFAS Project Lab, and they estimate that there are over 57,000 contaminated sites across the country, presumptively contaminated sites. And we could discuss the study at length. A lot of entities do not like being labeled as presumptively contaminated, but it still goes to show the expected extent of PFAS contamination across the country. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce estimates that private sector circular liabilities are going to cost $700 to $800 million per year. So, the extent of contamination here is very large and potentially very, very expensive. Next slide, please. So I'm going to finish on one final slide here on PFAS treatment. And when talking about PFAS treatment and remediation, it's important to make a distinction between three separate categories here, right? Separation technologies, disposal technologies, and destruction technologies. And so separation technologies are technologies that will remove PFAS from bulk liquid streams, and there are a number out there that work very well, that are commercially available and well proven and very effective for PFAS. And in fact, many of these technologies are technologies that we've been using in the environmental industry for other contaminants for decades. But they all have limitations, and that primary limitation is that they all still produce a concentrated brine or spent media that still needs to be managed. And so you turn to disposal or destruction. And for disposal, there's hazardous waste landfilling or deep well injection, some site-specific considerations of on-site storage, interim storage. But to destroy these compounds, it's another story here. And in the destruction category, incineration really reigns supreme here. It's had some hiccups over the years, namely a DOD self-imposed moratorium on incinerating PFAS impacted wastes. That was imposed because there were studies that showed regional deposition from poor incinerating practices. That moratorium is now lifted, and those concerns are largely gone, particularly if you're working with a reputable incinerator. And there's a number of emerging technologies that are very, very cool here, but are still working their way into full-scale commercialization and large scale proving of themselves. And at this point, none of these emerging tech have accomplished that. So a lot of development in this space, and a lot of activity to keep your eye on here. But with that, I'll hand it over to Dustin to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Kyle. As Dustin comes on in here, we will switch their spots. Thank you all for your patience as well. It looks like quite a few people are still coming in and out. Here we go. All right, well, thank you. And here is Dustin.
All right, thanks Jordan, and thanks Kyle for the presentation. So I'm Dustin Hobble, Assistant Airport Director of Operations here at the Jacksonville Airport. I get the opportunity to speak with you about the Jacksonville Airport F3 foam transition that we did into last year. It was obviously a team effort, but I get the opportunity to share it. One of the presentations we gave was at the Northwest AAA Airports Conference, and we did that with SeaTac and Port of Portland, and that was probably one of my favorite presentations. And really, the reason for that was the theme that we shared. Each airport, community, state has unique attributes, and each one of us, SeaTac, Port of Portland, and the Jacksonville Airport, took a different strategy and process on moving forward because we all had different variables that we needed to take into account and consideration. So with that, Jordan, if you don't mind going to the next slide, we really just need to share a bit about the Jacksonville Airport, kind of the environmental commitments, and really kind of what's some of the driving factors behind why we did what we did. I'll spend most of the time actually over those things, discussing water quality here, and then basically a little bit of time on the F3 transition. And if there's time at the end, look forward to answering any questions. And I'll share a little bit about the future. Next slide, please. So Jacksonville Airport is governed by a joint powers board, so it's 5-member volunteer board. One of the unique things about Jacksonville Airport is we're the only commercial service airport in a national park. As you see the national park symbol there, and the beautiful Grand Tetons in the background. So our landlord is actually the Department of Interior, and we operate under what we call a 1983 use agreement. So it's their property when we use it. The airport board has a number of employees, around a little over 100. That is administration staff, operations ARF staff, security staff, and as of May of last year, we now run the FBO, Jacksonville Flight Services. The board's vision is to be recognized as a leader, delivering a positive and unique guest experience and unwavering commitment unwavering commitment to environmental stewardship and a unique culture based on people helping people. Next slide. There we go. I'm not going to go over all these things in for time purposes, etc. But really, the reason why I put up this slide here was just to show that the Jacksonville Airport has a number of sustainability, water, recycling, and other initiatives. And this was just for you all to kind of get a flavor of kind of our background and some of our drivers moving this along. Next slide, please. So water quality has been a focus of the airport for a number of years. And I'll probably go over this in a little bit more detail on a future slide, but we're over what's called a sole source aquifer. What that means is the majority of the community and houses, etc., around the airport pull their water from a well versus like a public water system, things of that nature. So we've had a relationship with USGS since 2008. That still continues through today. They do basically level checks and water quality tests not so much for PFAS, but for a lot of other water quality attributes. So we've used basically those reports and information and done other improvements at the airport, the ice pad project, ramp reconstruction, some other things that I'll be talking about here in a little bit. So if you're ever interested, you can just Google Jacksonville Airport, USGS, and you get to the website and you can pull up our reports and a number of other things. Next slide, please. So kind of on that water quality theme, back in 2019, we installed a very large underground stormwater detention and filtration system, largest in the state. If you look at that bottom right picture, that's a picture of a beam constructed. So those are the baffles, the gravel, and then what we call a burrito wrap, so a rubber welded membrane that goes around that. And when that was completed, the aircraft parking and vehicle parking areas of the airport were basically all run through there and had the capacity for a 100-year storm event. It was popular, worked pretty well. So we really kind of continued with that particular theme. And in 2022, when we did our runway reconstruction project, we added double slot drains along the entire length of the runway and on Alpha 1 and Alpha 4. So all those flows now go through that stormwater filtration system as well. And really, we continue with our future projects with the intention to capture 100% of paved surfaces in the future. The one slide that's on there is our planned de-ice pad improvements. It'll be done over a number of years for funding, phasing, etc. But currently, the basically dark gray areas are being constructed, and that'll be completed next week. The concrete pads will be on a future phase of another project. After here this fall, we're going to double the size of our stormwater filtration system to get us back to closer to a 100-year storm event. Next slide, please. So PFAS has been really a focus of the team on our weekly environmental calls since 2020. As we all know, 2020 had plenty of challenges. But we started our testing and mitigation back then. So if you look at the exhibit on the right, there's kind of a green outline. That's the Jacksonville Airport, and to the kind of down and to the left or southwest is the groundwater study area, because all the groundwater underneath flows in that direction down towards the river. And we really kind of broke it into 3 phases. If you look at the left exhibit, there's kind of the 3 different colors. We started obviously closest to the airport doing testing, and then we worked our way again down and to the left. What that created for us was that exhibit there in the middle. We call that our PFAS eligibility boundary. And basically, at those edges, there would be non-detect for PFAS. However, if you're in that blue area, we made whole house water filtration systems available to those residences. So far, we've installed the majority of them, which is over 80 residences. Our website has a ton of information if you're interested to learn more about it. But as you can see, since 2020, PFAS has been a topic of our conversations. Next slide, please. So now onto the kind of F3 transition. So the Jacksonville Airport is an Index B airport, so we're required to have 1 truck, 1,500 gallons of water and associated foam. However, we have 2 3,000-gallon ARF trucks, and the reason for that is our distance from the airport, backup, et cetera, et cetera. And both of those trucks are kind of mid 2000s vintage. So our long-term objective is to replace both of those trucks because of potential rebound and a handful of other things, and just again due to their age. I really appreciate the State Division of Aeronautics. We worked with them for a number of years and got a grant for the first ARF truck, and then we procured, or we are locally funding the second truck. We anticipate the first truck arriving here into next month, and the other one here early next year. However, the timing of the FAA approving the Solberg F3 foam and being available on the market, we wanted to additionally convert those existing ARF trucks from AFFF to F3. We had been planning on this, so we already had the orders ready and available. So we just executed that purchase and received it a couple weeks after the FAA announcement. We'd also been working with our kind of disposal company. We ended up working with Clean Harbors on this particular project. So we lined up the receipt of the new foam and them to come out and help us with the transition. The reason why we went with Clean Harbors is they would take it to an incineration facility and guarantee 99.999% destruction through that particular process. We started with one truck, pulled off all the foam, rinsed out the tanks, did another good flush of the tanks with water, and then put it into service, filled it up, commissioned it, put it into service, and then started on the second truck. We completed both the trucks, and all AFFF was hauled off on October 25th, 2023. Next slide, please. So back to kind of how I, opened it up earlier, with our conversations and presentation with CTAC, Port of Portland at that Northwest AAA Airports Conference. There's a lot of variables for everyone to consider. Obviously, everyone on here is focused on Wyoming, but there's those regulations. Those are obviously impacted by EPA and federal decisions. Age of your trucks. It'd obviously be really hard to dispose of a relatively new truck. Funding sources, how you're going to pay for it, et cetera, et cetera. Additionally, if you have public water systems and not wells and things of that nature, it could affect your decision making. So we look forward to learning from others and making any tweaks we need to down the road. And with that said, I'll hand it over to Carr and Lena to talk about their systems.
Awesome. Thank you, Dustin. Well, Carr and Lena are coming to the stage. Oh, I heard me. There we go. All right. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great. So first of all, thank you to the leadership at the Wyoming Airports Coalition and to Jackson Hole for putting this together. It's a pleasure to be a part of it. Certainly information that needs to be shared and timely. My name is Lena Ramos, and I'm with No Foam Systems. We're an environmentally friendly technology company that helps teams test their foam proportioning systems without discharging foam. And given the environmentally friendly aspect, of course, as Dustin mentioned at Jackson Hole Airport, we were part of their F3 transition. And we do this environmentally friendly with water or surrogate liquid. Next slide. So today we're going to just let you know a little bit about who we are. We're going to dive a little deeper into the F3 transition using Jackson Hole as the case study and maybe share a little more from 2 other airports. We'll look at the key steps of the F3 transition, focus specifically on what our expertise is, which is the proportioner testing, and then share the learnings from those case studies. Next slide. Just a little bit about who we are. No Foam Systems, as we mentioned, focuses on proportioner testing. Our product is FAA approved, NFPA 460 approved, FAA grant funding approved, Part 139 airports. We have a national designation for Buy America, and we're in hundreds of airports, both civil and military, and we're universal to all our vehicles. Contact information's there for you. Most importantly, emails so that you can have access to us if you want to get in touch and ask any questions after this discussion. But net, both Co and I have dedicated our careers to environmentally friendly clean tech or regulation technology. Next slide. Just a couple of sample installations on the civil side, left to right, west coast to east coast. Importantly, in the center, you can see we've worked with several great airports in Wyoming, Jackson Hole, Casper, Sheridan, Southwest Wyoming. And again, as I mentioned, hundreds of airports across the globe, not just in the United States. Next slide. So regarding the F3 transition, I'm only going to say one thing about this, and then I'll let Koa talk a little to the technical aspects of each. But in the spirit of shared learnings, the one thing that we've learned, if with those hundreds of airports that we work with, is we're getting calls, and these are the stakeholders that you might expect to have to be in contact with as you plan your F3 transition. So who you purchase, who will clean your, which F3 foam you'll purchase, who will clean your truck, who will handle waste management, the hardware, if necessary, to your ARF vehicle, and then our focus area, the proportioner. With that, I'll let Koa make comment to this slide and take us forward for anything technical.
Yeah, hi, everybody. So basically here is a guideline to how you do this if you want to go in and perform an F3 transition. The first circle you can see, purchase the F3, the fluorine-free foam. For that, you'd go in and check the QPL. That's the official list of which foams are approved by the FAA. So that's fairly easy right now. There's two. There's going to be more as time goes more forward. The second thing you will have to do is clean out your ARF truck that you're going to be transitioning. And for that, there's a cert alert that's listed there, cert alert 2405. That is the FAA a recommendation as to what is clean enough. What's the simplest way you can do this? A couple of rinses. I think it was part of the process that was used here for Jackson. And so you can also go into a more deeper cleaning, but all of that, all you have to do is reference back to the cert alert 2405. The next thing you'll be doing is looking at waste management. How do we deal with the any spill that we might have on the as we take it out? How do we deal with the old AFFF that was on the truck and the wastewater from rinsing the truck? And how do we deal with the storage extra amounts of AFFF we have on the shelves? And for that, you have to go into your state regulations and your airport policy specific guidance. That is not universal across the board. So you have to go in and talk to your environmental folks and have a plan together that says, for our state, for our location here, this is what waste management requirements would be. Then the next thing you will have to do is to look at any hardware changeover that you may need. The reason for this is because the new fluorine-free foams are more viscous, they're thicker, and because of that, you may need a bigger orifice on your proportioner. The guidance for that is you go to your truck manufacturer, and they have, for example, Oshkosh has a bulletin out that is telling you exactly what you need to do. You can ask us for it as well, but basically go to your truck manufacturer, say, we're planning to do this. What do we need to do? What's your guidance for the hardware changeover? Then you do your changeover, and we'll go back to that in the next slide. But first, the next step will be after you've done your changeover, you'll then need to test your proportioner. And the testing there is going to be, you have two options. You can either just spray the fluorine-free foam on the ground and do an output-based test with that. But in doing so, it costs a lot of money. You have a cleanup afterwards, and it's probably not good for the ground to put foam on it if you don't have to. The other option is to use a surrogate, and a surrogate, we'll talk a little bit more about what it is, but it'll do the same job for less money and no cleanup required. After you've tested it, you'll have shown and documented that your truck with the new hardware and with the new foam is still in compliance. and then you're basically done with your transition as your last step of the transition. And then afterwards, if you want to, if you're doing input-based testing, you can then use that test as your true north for the truck, and then use that to establish a baseline for a water-based output-based or input-based test. And so that would be an optional step. For that, you typically, if you're doing input-based testing, that would be our equipment, for example. You'd reach out to us and get some additional guidance. Next slide, please. All right, so let's go back to the proportional testing. Specifically for the proportional testing that we're involved in, we always recommend the first thing is to do a pre-test with an input-based tester before you do any changes to the truck. You want to make sure that your truck is working because it's easier to fix it before you start changing anything over. So you make sure your truck works as best as it can. Then secondly, you'll do your hardware changeover as needed, and that depends on the truck, what you need to do. Then thirdly, you'll do you'll test the output-based test with the surrogate test liquid, as we just spoke about, and then you'll establish your baselines for an input-based testing for going forward and in the future, being able to test with water going forward. Next slide, please. And so what does the surrogate look like? Right here, you see a beautiful picture of Alton that we work with in the Jackson Hole Airport for this specific task. They were the first airport, and also with us, they were the first customer we were out with, and that's it was our first case study for how to actually do this. So that surrogate right there being loaded onto the truck, you do a discharge. The surrogate itself has the same viscosity as your specific foam. We have different versions for the different manufacturers. And so this was a Solberg matched up viscosity. So that means with the same viscosity, it will flow the same as the actual foam would. It has the same conductivity as well. So you can do an output-based test, collect the sample, do the old-fashioned conductivity testing on it. Once it's on the ground, it is completely biodegradable. And it's very cost effective. It's cheaper than the foam itself, and there's no cleanup cost afterwards. Next slide, please. And here again from Jackson Hole is the outcome after doing the testing. You'll see for each discharge, you'll have the actual foam percentage going through the list, and then you'll see here, as we would hope every truck would do, it will pass on everything after that you're done with the testing, and that is your documentation to the FAA and to the world that your truck is still in compliance after everything you've done and with the new foam. Next slide, please. And then right here, I'll just go quickly over this one here. We did a couple other case studies, one in which they didn't test the truck beforehand. And so what we found was that once we did the testing, it was a 5% foam. And as we were doing that, turns out the truck had the computer on the truck had to be reset, and then the truck was fixed, and then they did the testing again, and then everything passed. The learning is test your truck before you begin your transition. That was case study number 2. Case study number 3 was a military airport. They were doing just fine, except for one of the discharges came out at 6%. And then we started talking to them. They said, well, we wanted to have a discharge that could do 6%. So actually we set it up for 6%, but it was consistent with what it was supposed to be. And that was kind of an illustration of saying each truck is different. Each truck's flows are unique. And so there's no general, you can't just say, okay, the truck was working before, it's probably going to be fine. You have to test each discharge on each truck. Next slide. And then finally, the learnings to date. Out there on the left, you can see what the surrogate looks like before it gets used on the truck. Basically, number one, look at the stakeholders and create a transition plan with all the different stakeholders. Call them up. Everybody's willing to talk. We're happy to get a phone call and guide you with whatever we can do to help out. Number 2 is be ready to pre-test your ARF. Make sure that your truck is working, and if it's not working, make sure you know that it wasn't working beforehand on a certain discharge or whatever, so that when you've done the changeover, you can say, okay, it is still, once we fix this problem, the truck is going to be back in good working order. And then number 3 is that the FAA is accepting the circuit-based testing instead of using a foam discharge. They say you must do an output-based test, but it can be foam or the circuit. And so they are accepting a result based on the circuit discharge. And then finally, be aware that each ARF is unique. Some need changes, some don't need changes. And the true result that you need to look for is that final output-based test, and that will also serve as your baseline going forward. And then there's still more to be learned. So if you call me up in 6 months because you're ready to change over, we might have additional things we can share with you. Next slide. And so there's some contact information for us, and we are always happy to talk to anybody out there. Lena?
Oh, we'll hand it back to Jordan. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. All right. As Alton is moving to the stage here, we did see a quick photo of him. There he is. All right, Alton George, here we go.
Hey everybody, Alton George, Operations Director here at Jackson. Just real quickly, Cor, really appreciate you coming out and spending that day with us. It was a long day, but it was a very good day. I'm glad to see in your photo there we're the model of a case study. That's very cool for me. So, we've heard today about what PFAS PFOA is. We've heard how to test it. We've heard how Jackson transitioned. So now you have a new F3, and now you also need to transition your training. And it's a quick slide, everybody. We'll get out of here really quickly, I promise. Go ahead, Jordan. All right, so everything I'm about to regurgitate to you is from Chief Mitch Isles with DFW. He's a good friend and a great mentor. Their training facility down there is definitely one of the best fixed facilities in the nation. And at a recent ARF Working Group conference, he gave a presentation about sort of what the new foam, how it acts versus the old one. And these are just some of the main bullet points. The similarities, and they stop right here with just the fire knockdown. Fire knockdown was negligible, the extra time it takes for the new F3s to put the fire down. But other than being bubbles, that's kind of where the similarities end. Then we move into what about the bubbles? What makes them special? So with AFFF, the old bubbles, they liked each other. You could disrupt them and they would rejoin. We could get on scene, spray foam everywhere, and it would just join up together. The new bubbles, they don't interact like that. As a matter of fact, they don't like each other. And everything out there in the environment disrupts them and causes holes in the blanket, which inevitably provides more risk on scene. And kind of the bread and butter of ARF ever since I've been in the industry has been the rain down method. You roll up with the truck, spray over the top of the plane, let everything soak down. And like I said, the old bubbles would rejoin. That's not really the case anymore. Now with the new F3s, anywhere you put the foam, that's the only place it's going to be. It's not going to join up with other areas. So the rain down method causes a lot of dispersion from the thermal updraft from the fire. And like I said, everything causes dispersion of the new foam. So dragging a hose line through it, walking through it, I think if you look at it wrong, it breaks down, to be honest. But anyway, the new tactic that they're teaching is the roll-on method. And I know that's not a new tactic, but it's a new go-to primary tactic for applying foam. The rain down method is not as efficient. I mean, you may be put in a scenario where you have to use that, but roll on if you can. And kind of the new thought is get the fire and the problem away from the people instead of just trying to put a blanket on top of it. It's truly no longer set and forget it. That leads us to another issue in the industry that particularly in the ARF world, everybody kind of beats the table about, and that's personnel limitations and the minimum staffing model the FAA gives to us as airports. Basically, they say, hey, airport, here's your minimum. You have to decide how many people makes you safe and go from there. Well, now with the new foam, you're going to have to apply more of it, particularly if you're working in the scene to extricate victims or what have you. You're going to be putting holes in that foam, and you're going to have to continually reapply and reassess the foam application. And that means resupplying water so you can continue applying that foam. And with the limited personnel that most airports have, that's going to create some more issues. So just, short and sweet, when and if you get the new F3, make sure you update your training and think through application methods. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Alton. Thank you, everybody. Kyle, we're bringing it right up to the very end here, but there are 5 minutes. Do you want to say anything or if anybody has any questions? Ooh, Kyle, you are muted.
Well, Zoom is hard today, isn't it?
It was a rough one.
First and foremost, Jordan, thank you so much for coordinating this Lunch and Learn series. We want to thank our partners at TriHydro and No Foam Solutions for their help. So Kyle, Lena, Cara, thank you so much. And also our partners at the Jackson Hole Airport. So Dustin and Alton, your information is very helpful. And this is such a topical and important subject right now. And this information I found to be very beneficial. We do apologize for any connectivity issues. Could have been worse. We could have been Delta, I guess. But we do apologize. We hope that everybody that wanted to join were able to join, even if it was late. So we're sorry for any miscommunications there, but we do appreciate your support and joining on. There are no current questions sitting in the Q&A, but we'll stay on for a few minutes and see if anybody would like to pose any questions. We can bring panelists back into the webinar and they can answer those, or we can do it just through written format. Well, it looks like we had one come in. So Bruce Ransom here at Central Wyoming mentioned with so many products that could be possible sources of PFAS contamination, does AFFF have a unique chemical signature that would identify it as a contaminant? And perhaps we could bring in some of our panelists to help answer that. Kyle, looks like you've been able to join. Would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I can help. There's a lot of research going into fingerprinting of PFAS, and this is a topic that a lot of industrial sectors are interested in, well beyond just those facilities that use AFFF, because there's so many potential sources. And the short answer is possibly, but right now that library does not exist. We do have some signatures, some general formulations of the various generations of AFFF over the years, and those can be helpful in sort of evaluating this, but it does not, the library of signatures, source signatures, does not exist to the extent that we can really differentiate. There's a lot of research in this, a lot of people looking at how you can differentiate, especially when you're talking about groundwater plumes, the contribution from different various sources. An airport may be contributing, some amount of PFAS, but if you're located to any of those other potential sources, landfills, wastewater treatment plants, any other industrial source, of course, that's a hot topic of research. But the short answer is not at this time. It's not fully developed to that stage, but a lot of research being conducted there.
Great. Thank you, Kyle, for jumping on. Bruce, thank you for your question. We've had another question come through. This is from Mary Olson. She was curious to know what the total cost for Jackson Hole was to convert to the no foam. And Dustin, it looks like you'd be able to help answer that question.
Yeah, so I'll kind of break down that particular questions into three parts, and I might let Cara and Lena address how much it costs for a no foam system. So that's how we test without using foam. But for the F3 transition, the cost of the foam, there was only one foam available, and we were an early adopter, so the pricing might be a little bit different. But we bought around a little over about 850 gallons, and that cost us about $50,000 for the foam. The cleaning disposal company charged us about $50,000 for coming out, bringing their truck, helping us clean the truck, haul it off, and incinerate it. So all in, it was about $100,000 for the transition from AFFF to F3. And I'll let Carr cover the cost of their systems. We bought ours, I think 3 years ago or something, so things might have changed.
Yes, thanks. So basically, the no foam system is FAA fundable, and so I think right now the cost share is about 10%, and that's going to run you anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000. It depends a little bit on how many trucks you have for your share. In terms of the transitioning, there's just the cost of the surrogate liquid, and you can buy that for however much you need. typically, you might be looking at a couple $1,000s per truck to get through the surrogate testing, which would on average maybe be less than 50% of the cost than if you were using the actual foam for the same test. And then also you don't have to count on any cleanup cost afterwards.
And then the only thing I'll add to that is if you are interested in tapping the FAA for the grant funding, then the first step is to contact your ADO and ask what their process is. But as recent as last month, we were in the field with some FAA folks, and it appears that there is still not the same reimbursement program, and that was in a guidance letter last year, but renewed pathways. But every ADO has the pathway for your airport.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cara and Lena and Dustin, for jumping in. Thank you for sending the question. We'll stay on for a few more minutes to see if there are any other questions. And as we wait, I just want to remind folks of our upcoming fall conference. We really want to invite you to attend. I've been so energized and excited by these Lunch and Learn series. We'll have one more as we lead up to our fall conference. So next month, our friends at the Cody Airport will host the Lunch and Learn series, and we appreciate their participation. We'll be sending more information out about the topic and the date, but plan on one more Lunch and Learn series as we lead up to our fall conference in September. And we really appreciate this chance to just gather as a coalition, share ideas, share information. I'd also like to mention that if there are topics that you as a member would like to have more discussion on and maybe have a little bit of education on, please contact a board member. We'd love to be responsive and ensure that you are receiving benefit and value from the Airports Coalition. Well, with that, it doesn't look like we have any outstanding questions. So, and I think we're right at time. Jordan, thank you again. Do you have any closing remarks?
I don't, well, I guess only closing remark is that these slides will be available, so we will get those sent out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all again for joining. I do apologize for any connection issues, but we're so glad that we had the people we had today. And thank you again to our partners for presenting, and we'll see you next month.